Hello, BookTube. And as you're aware, I've been doing sorting of books and the piles around me. And off camera, to the front of me and to the left, there were a few piles in front of some smaller bookcases. And they have been covered up for quite a while. And I wanted to clear out at least one, possibly two of these bookcases. I have done the one so I can put books that I'm currently or for the next month dealing with or continually dealing with on BookTube. So, and on the very bottom shelf, I had a bunch of my Everymens. There was about maybe 40 of them, I think, or 50 that were able to be double stacked and put up, and they just filled up the whole space. And they've been sitting there for, I don't know, 4 years, 5 years. I'd sort of separated. I knew what sort of section of the Everman Library it was, so I knew what was there, or at least I thought I did. Now, there's been a book of essays that I purchased at some point, and that I've been looking for years and years and years, and I've scoured the shelves, my essays, and I could never find it. And it's this book here. It's the same size as the Everyman Library books, the old ones. So somehow, when I was putting them on the shelf there, this got mixed up and just got put in the back, and it's been sitting there ever since. And you ask, what is it? Well, it's a it's an anthology of three books of a series that was called Essays of Today and Yesterday. There probably is at least 20 or more of these. They were very slim. They were like 60 pages long, approximately, and some of them are getting kind of pricey. But this one houses G.K. Chesterton with about 4 or 5 essays, um, Francis Thompson, and Dion Clayton Calthrop. But other names that are with these is like James Agate, Alice Meynell, A.C. Benson, Andrew Lang, Andrew Bennett, C.E. Montague, Hilary Block, Austin Burrell, J.B. Priestley, and just so on. Many, many more that were done. And well, anyway, the short of all this is that I wanted it for the G.K. Chesterton essays, and especially the very first one in here. And I decided I want to read it again. And I figured, well, why not just record while I read this, or at least give it a try. And it's called A Defense of Nonsense. I don't have the exact date that it was published, but it was in the Defiant. So here goes A Defense of Nonsense. There are two equal and eternal ways of looking at this twilight world of ours. We may see it as the twilight of evening or the twilight of morning. We may think of anything down to a fallen acorn as a descendant or as an ancestor. There are times when we are almost crushed, not so much with the load of the evil on which the load of the goodness of humanity, when we feel that we are nothing but the inheritors of a humiliating splendor. But there are other times when everything seems primitive, when the ancient stars are only sparks blown from a boy's bonfire, when the whole earth seems so young and experimental that even the white hair of the aged, in the fine biblical phrase, is like almond trees that blossom, like the white hawthorn grown in May. That is a good that it is good for a man to realize that he is the heir of all the ages is pretty commonly admitted. It is a less popular but equally important point that it is good for him sometimes to realize that he is not only an ancestor, but an ancestor of primal antiquity. It is good for him to wonder whether he is not a hero and to experience ennobling doubts as to whether he is not a solar myth. The matters which most thoroughly evoke his sense of abiding childhood of the world are those which are really fresh, abrupt, and inventive in any age. And if we were asked what was the best proof of this adventurous youth in the 19th century, we should say, with all respect to its portentous sciences, sciences and philosophies that it was to be found in the rhymes of Mr. Edward Lear and in the literature of nonsense. The dong with the luminous nose at best is original, as the first ship and the first plow were original. It is true in a sense, in a certain sense, that some of the greatest writers the world has seen, Aristophanes, Rabelais, and Sterne, have written nonsense. But unless we are mistaken, it is a widely different nonsense. The nonsense of these men was satiric, and that is to say, symbolic. It was a kind of exuberant capering round discovered truth. There is all the difference in the world between the instinct of satire, which, seeing in the Kaiser's mustache something typical of him, draws them continually larger and larger, and the instance of nonsense, which, for no reason whatever, imagines that those mustaches would look like on the present Archbishop of Canterbury, if he grew them to a fit of in a fit of absence of mind. We inclined to think that no age except our own could have understood that the quangle wangle meant absolutely nothing, and the lands of the Jumblies were absolutely nowhere. We fancy that if the account of the knave's trial in Alice in Wonderland had been published in the 17th century, it would have been bracketed with Bunyan's trial of Faithful as the parody on the state prosecutions of the time. We fancy that the dong with the luminous nose had appeared in the same period. Everyone would have called it a dull satire on Oliver Cromwell. It is altogether advisedly that we quote chiefly from Mr. Lear's nonsense rhymes. To our mind, he is both chronologically and essentially the father of nonsense. We think him superior to Lewis Carroll. In one sense, indeed, Lewis Carroll has a great advantage. We know that Lewis Carroll was in daily life. He was a singularly serious and conventional don, universally respected, but very much of a pedant and something of a Philistine. Thus, his strong double life in earth and in dreamland emphasizes the idea that lies in the back of nonsense, the idea of escape into a world where things are not fixed horribly in an eternal appropriateness, where apples grow on pear trees, and any odd man you meet may have 3 legs. Lewis Carroll living one life in which he would have thundered morally against anyone who walked on the wrong plot of grass, and another in which he would cheerfully call the sun green and the moon blue, was, by his very divided nature, his one foot on both worlds, a perfect type of his position of modern nonsense. His wonderland is a country populated by insane mathematicians. We feel that the whole is an escape into a world of masquerade. We feel that if he could pierce their disguises, we might discover that Humpty Dumpty and the March Hare were professors and doctors of divinity enjoying a mental holiday. This sense of escape is certainly less emphatic in Edward Lear because of the completeness of his citizenship in the world of unreason. We do not know his prosaic biography as we know Lewis Carroll's. We accept him as a purely fabulous figure on his own description of himself. Quote, his body is perfectly spherical, he weareth a runcible hat. When Lewis Carroll's Wonderland is purely intellectual, Lear introduces quite another element. The element of the poetical and even emotional. Carroll works by the pure reason, but this is not so strong a contrast. For after all, mankind in the main has always regarded reason as a bit of a joke. Lear introduces his unmeaning words and his amorphous creatures not with the pomp of reason, but with the romantic prelude of rich hues and haunting rhythms. Quote, far and few are the islands where the Jumblies live. In an entirely different type of poetry to that exhibited in Jabberwocky, Carroll, with a sense of mathematical neatness, makes his whole poem a mosaic of new and mysterious words. But Edward Lear, with a more subtle and placid effrontery, is always introducing scraps of his own elfish dialect into the middle of simple and rational statements until we are almost stunned into admitting that we know what they mean. There is a genial ring of common sense about such lines as, quote, "For his aunt Jobzika said, everyone knows that the Pobly is better without his toes," which is beyond the reach of Carroll. The poet seems so easy on the matter that we are almost driven to pretend that we see his meaning and that we know the peculiar difficulties of a Pobly, and we are as old travelers in the Gramboldian plain as he is. Our claim that nonsense is a new literature, we might almost say a new sense, would be quite indefensible if nonsense were nothing more than a mere aesthetic fancy. Nothing subtly artistic has ever arisen out of mere art, any more than anything essentially reasonable has ever arisen out of the pure reason. There must always be a rich moral soil of any great aesthetic growth. The principle of art for art's sake is a very good principle if it means that there is a vital distinction between the earth and the tree that has its roots in the earth. But it is a very bad principle if it means that the tree should grow just as well with its roots in the air. Every great literature has always been allegorical of some sort of the whole universe. The Iliad is only great because all life is a battle, the Odyssey because all life is a journey, the Book of Job because all life is a riddle. There is one attitude in which we think that all existence is summed up in the word ghosts, another, that somewhat better one, in which we think it is summed up in the words of a Midsummer's Night's Dream. Even the vaguest or vulgarest melodrama or detective story can be good if it expresses something of the delight in sinister possibilities. The healthy lust for darkness and terror which may come on us any night in walking down a dark lane. If therefore nonsense is really to be the literature of the future, it must have its own version of the cosmos to offer. It would the world must not only be the tragic, romantic, and religious; it must be nonsensical also. And here we fancy the nonsense well, in a very unexpected way, came to the aid of spiritual view of things. Religion has for centuries been trying to make men exult in the wonders of creation, but it has forgotten that the thing cannot be completely wonderful so long as it remains sensible. So long as we regard a tree as an obvious thing, naturally and reasonably created for a giraffe to eat, we cannot properly wonder at it. It is when we consider it as a prodigious wave of the living soil sprawling up to the skies for no reason in particular, then we take off our hats to the astonishment of the park keeper. Everything has, in fact, another side to it, like the moon, the patroness of nonsense. Viewed from that other side, a bird is a blossom broken loose from its chain of stalk. A man is quadrupled being. A quadruped begging on his hind legs, a house, a gigantic hat to cover a man from the sun, a chair, an apparatus of 4 wooden legs for a cripple with only 2. This is the side of things which tends most truly to spiritual wonder. It is significant that the greatest religious poem existent, the Book of Job, the argument which convinces the infidel, is not, as has been represented by the merely rational regionalism of the 18th century. A picture of the ordered beneficence of the creation, but on the contrary, a picture of the huge, undecipherable unreason of it. Hast thou sent the rain upon the desert where no man is? This simple sense of wonder at the shape of things and at their exuberant independence of our intellectual standards and our trivial definitions is the basis of spirituality, as it is the basis of nonsense. Nonsense and faith, strange as the conjunction may seem, are the two supreme symbolic assertions of the truth that would to draw out the soul of things with the syllogism is as impossible as to draw out Leviathan with a hook. The well-meaning person who, by merely studying the logical side of things, has decided that faith is nonsense, does not know how truly he speaks. Later it will come back to him in the form that nonsense is faith. And that ends a defense of nonsense. And something else I wanted to say about this book. It was published... do I have a date here? 1928. And it was a prize at a convent. It says, prize awarded to Margaret Martin, Form 4, Convent of the Assumption, Richmond, York, for second Spanish, July 1948. So that's a nice little bit. It's a little strange. It doesn't have the publisher's name at the bottom, but it's a nice little book. It's kind of a weird... it's like a... I kind of question if actually this is a 1928 printing. It does say 1928, but I have a feeling it might not be, because it's like a vinyl-y feel to the boards. But anyway, that's an extra essay today. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.